Hey, awesome guys. Today we're going to be learning about dopamine levels and how to fix them, essentially. In this day and age with everyone being on the phones and a bunch of like instant gratification stuff, dopamine levels are essentially ruined. So in this video, I'm going to go through everything that I know about dopamine and how to fix it. Of course, first we've got to understand what dopamine actually is. So dopamine is essentially just a hormone that's involved in the reward pathways of the brain. Essentially, it's designed to drive you towards wanting to gain pleasure, essentially. So obviously how this would have worked in the real world is actually when we were hunter-gatherers, we'd hunt for an animal, and the reward was obviously actually getting sustenance for the day and eating and not dying of starvation. So our bodies would release dopamine as a way of essentially rewarding us for that, and would next time drive us to want to go out and repeat those activities again. So it's mainly involved in drive. Food is a good example, and food is kind of a good example for a lot of guys who are struggling to adhere to a diet. You get a release of dopamine when you get to eat that chocolate, when you get to eat those crisps and the bad junk food. Yeah, essentially, that's just dopamine in action there, involved in those reward pathways, driving you. You get a spike in dopamine, just the thought of getting some junk food, and then you get a big spike in dopamine when you actually get the junk food, and then it goes down after, which is what we'll get into now. So yeah, you need to understand dopamine's involved in basically like anything pleasurable, essentially. So yeah, I've kind of gone into this a little bit already, but here's a graph kind of just showing you what happens. It's called the dopamine curve, and essentially you have little spikes in dopamine, as you can sort of see here, when you're thinking about like in the build up and the anticipation to doing something, and then when you actually do that thing, that pleasurable thing, you have a huge spike in dopamine. And then this is the key thing: after that thing, it goes down, it crashes down below where it was before you did that task. So obviously, let's take junk food for the example again. You kind of, you know you shouldn't be eating junk food, but you kind of can see the cookies or something in the cupboard, and the chocolate digestives or whatever it is, and you really want them. So you sort of have dopamine spikes kind of driving you to do it, and then you eventually do it, have a huge spike in dopamine, and then you crash, and then you feel kind of shit that you've done it. And this is kind of what happens after you've done that. Essentially, you feel shitty afterwards, and you feel down for the rest of the day. It takes longer for the dopamine to get back to what you were before. The pleasure doesn't last as long as the kind of the trough, the guilt, essentially, after doing something like that. So you can sort of see where this is going then with this kind of curve. The bigger that the actual peak in dopamine is, so the bigger the pleasurable activity, the more pleasurable it is, then the deeper the actual trough is, and the further below baseline you actually go. So your body has a certain amount of dopamine that it can produce, and when you there's a good analogy that when you do something that's pleasurable, it's almost like a swimming pool, and the pleasurable thing's like a huge wave in the pool, and sometimes the waves are so big that when they come back down, it splashes water out of the pool, and when that water comes out of the pool, it's like this. It's like a permanent decrease in the baseline. The baseline actually drops down to meet with this level the more and more times you do this. So the bigger, the more pleasurable the activity is, and the bigger the trough's going to be. So this can end up in a vicious cycle, and you can see here, if we imagine this is the dopamine curve, you can see huge pleasurable activity, and then it goes down into this trough here. And then if you don't allow your body to get back to baseline, you do something else pleasurable, then it's going to go down again. And this kind of example at the end here is where you do something, you're in the middle of a trough, essentially, a dopamine trough, and you do something pleasurable again, and it goes back even further down, and you can kind of end up just going downwards like this all the way down, and the baseline is going to follow that down, and you end essentially where this actually leads is almost like depressive symptoms, like just becoming more sad. You have less dopamine at your disposal because you're using it too fast, essentially. Well, first of all, in order to fix it, we've got to figure out what causes it. So what creates peaks in dopamine? Smoking, porn, social media is a massive one. Video games, a bit of a nice one up here. It's not too bad, just laughing with friends. I mean, that releases dopamine. Drugs, a positive one here, winning. So winning, achieving a goal of yours, a big win. releases dopamine, and drinking as well. Drinking actually releases dopamine. So you can see these are kind of all the bad habits, really, apart from obviously the winning and laughing with friends. They're good habits that release dopamine, and you should carry on doing things like social interactions and carry on getting wins. But the bad habits, you can see that lots of guys are kind of addicted to: video games, porn, drugs, smoking, drinking, social media. It's all these things are huge releases of dopamine. The more rapid dopamine is released, then the deeper the trough's going to be. So you can imagine that makes sense, because obviously with porn, it's so quick to happen, the dopamine release, that you feel logarithmically worse related to that, if that makes sense. And the drugs especially, drugs are a huge one. These are unbelievable increases in dopamine when you take something like cocaine, but then a huge trough. And this is how people can end up in these really vicious cycles of having to try and escape that huge deep trough. They have to do more cocaine, and then they go down even more down. It just ends up this spiral going downwards and leads to depression, essentially. And same with alcohol, really. So what actually creates troughs then? So we've just talked about what creates peaks. They're the huge peaks in dopamine. What are the activities that don't create a peak at all? They just take your dopamine from baseline and then straight into a trough. The activities that do this are, unsurprisingly, activities that are the opposite of fun. Okay, these are activities that usually people would say aren't fun. Things like cold plunge. Got our boy Liver King there. Biggest fake natty going in a cold plunge. Got some dude in the cold shower. I've started doing cold showers in the last 2 months or so. Been brilliant. I'll go on to that a bit more later, but they've been great. Things like fighting, getting into those uncomfortable situations where, maybe you're boxing and you got to take a few punches to the face, something like that. These are all uncomfortable situations. At the bottom right, I've got social interaction that's awkward. Maybe you've been rejected or something by a girl, whatever it is. Things that are uncomfortable, that have, the build up to doing them is anticipation, is anxious. It doesn't actually release any dopamine. It's like, you don't want to do it. No one wants to jump in the cold shower. No one wants to go in a cold plunge. No one wants to get punched in the face. But when you do it, it creates a trough. And when you're in that trough, it essentially allows you to come out of it above baseline. So it's the opposite of the peaks. The peaks actually lower your baseline and after the good experience, you're going further below baseline. When you actually do an activity that is essentially painful, preemptively put your body into that lowered state, and then when you come out of that trough, you actually it's the opposite effect. You go above. You actually create more dopamine. And you might think, well, how do you create more dopamine? That doesn't make any sense. You must have dopamine and you can go below it, but how do you create more dopamine? And this is the simple reason why. Dopamine essentially turns into norepinephrine. Norepinephrine is like adrenaline, essentially. It's a kind of adrenaline hormone. So anything that creates adrenaline uses up dopamine. So when your body has a deficit of dopamine, like you physically used it up, you've like not just used the dopamine to actually create the pleasurable experience. Your body has actually translated dopamine and metabolized it into norepinephrine, which is the kind of chemical that's released during a cold shower, for example. Your body will release a lot of this and it gets your heart rate up really fast and gets you really alert. That's why it's really good to do in the morning. That actually creates a deficit in dopamine and prompts your body to make more of it, which is what allows us to get out of that trough and actually increase our baseline dopamine. So we've got to do uncomfortable shit in order to, in the long run, feel better overall, instead of just compounding pleasurable stuff, which just sinks us deeper into that kind of never-ending quest for pleasure and need. If we actually preemptively do things that are uncomfortable, that we don't want to do, it actually allows us to appreciate the things that are good more, because we have a heightened level of dopamine in our body. That's essentially how dopamine works. By raising our neural set point with repeated pleasures, we become endless strivers, never satisfied with what we have, always looking for more. So now I'm going to go through the actual steps that I implemented that's allowed me to kind of appreciate shit more, actually be just genuinely happy, a better mood, and feeling less like depressed. I think a lot of people who claim they're depressed, to be honest, could do with just a dopamine detox, which is what this video is about. And this is the simple steps. I'm just going to keep it as simple as possible. The majority of this video is explaining the concept, because I feel like I could have just made this video, said do this, and most of you guys wouldn't have even done it. Now that you actually understand why I'm telling you to do this, the actual science technically behind dopamine, and the mechanisms of action of the reward pathways of dopamine, you guys are actually going to understand why these steps make sense and probably more likely to do them. Step 1, quit social media. Do not consume. Stop being a consumer. Delete TikTok. Unfollow all the meme pages and shit posters on your Instagram, and only use your phone for when it's needed. Okay? So if you're wanting to communicate with your friends still, and you want to communicate with your girlfriend still, or whatever it is, your mom, your dad, use your phone for WhatsApp, texts, and calls, right? I stopped using Snapchat. Don't have TikTok. Never have had TikTok. And I've basically taken my Instagram from following like 300 people, and they were all like basically crap meme pages and like funny videos and stuff. Just unfollow them all, right? And now whenever I go on Instagram, I'm just shown, like, to be honest, it's a lot more of a boring experience going on Instagram now, and I don't really go on it very much anyway, but it's made me go on it even less because there just isn't as much funny stuff on there anymore. But those funny things were causing a mini spike in dopamine, and after I'd seen something funny, I would then realize, why am I on my phone wasting time on social media? Puts me into a trough, and people can get addicted to social media as easy as that. And that's the main thing. Step 1, quit social media. Cold showers. So you guys aren't going to like this one. I didn't like doing this one to start off with, but I actually have been doing it for a few months now, and I really, really like cold showers. I'll probably do them for the rest of my days. Every other day I have a cold shower in the morning, and it's a bit brutal sometimes. I'm not going to lie to you guys. Brutal. But this is by far, other than a cold plunge, get your dopamine levels, your baseline dopamine up quickly. Okay, and I mean quickly. This can actually improve your mood within a few days of doing this. Okay, so every morning when you wake up, you're going to go downstairs, jump in a cold shower, anywhere between 1 and 3-4 minutes. Try and aim for like 2-3 minutes. Okay, and don't be a little pussy and have it kind of like lukewarm. Right, have that shit cold. Obviously, don't give yourself a heart attack. You know, be reasonable. Go into the shower with it cold, just, you know, relatively cold, and then like make it more and more and more cold until it gets to the point where it's like, right, this is super uncomfortable, and your brain's telling you to get out, but you're not like breathing so badly that you actually could have a heart attack, right? You want to have it just like cold, right? Really cold, not freezing, but like cold to the point where just have it so you can stand there for 10 seconds and your brain is like, get out, get out, get out. It's just telling you to get out, but don't, okay? Stay in there for 1 to 2 minutes, okay? This is going to be really uncomfortable, and it's horrible, and I hate doing it. But wow, afterwards, after you get out the cold shower, okay, you get this like absolute sense of like euphoria. Okay, it's like a great feeling on a morning, and it just sets you up so well for the day. And that is literally in action the conversion of dopamine. Okay, it's going to be a bit sciencey now, guys, but the conversion of dopamine into norepinephrine, which is adrenaline, essentially. Your body needs adrenaline because you get in a cold shower and your body needs to produce lots of adrenaline to tell you to get out and to like kind of get your heart rate up and to like get you in that zone, right? Like you're being attacked or something. And your body uses dopamine to transform. It uses that to create adrenaline. So you suddenly have your dopamine was here, and now what? You've used it all and to create adrenaline, right? In the cold shower. When you come out, you have a huge deficit in dopamine. Your body just starts producing it again. Above baseline, right? Baseline's here. Dopamine goes down in the cold shower, goes above baseline. You feel great. Yeah, simple as that. Baseline raises. Feel great for the rest of the day. Simple as that. It's the opposite of feeling shit after watching porn. It's the opposite. It's the complete opposite. And number 3, the final step, is delayed gratification. So this is essentially delaying pleasurable habits. So we talked about the habits at the start that create big peaks in dopamine, which lead to big troughs in dopamine. Delayed gratification essentially is not doing things that are going to provide pleasure super quickly, right? Not smoking, not drinking. Doing things that maybe aren't great, maybe are a bit boring, but might provide pleasure in the future, in the next day, in the next week. This is things like going to the gym, okay? You might not like going to the gym. You might go to the gym and hate it. But in a year's time, you might have a great physique and think, thank God I went to the gym, right? Avoid instant gratification. So avoid porn, avoid video games, avoid alcohol, etc. Anything that's you can do right now, it's going to take you 5 seconds to do, and it's going to be fun, right? Not saying you can't have fun. I'm just saying things that provide instant gratification are going to create big spikes in dopamine. Instant gratification essentially can translate to instant dopamine, right? And as we said, the faster that curve goes up, the deeper the trough, okay? So the more shit you're going to feel, right? So you've got to do something that's hard before doing something fun. So I'd suggest if you're going to go out on a night out drinking with your boys, right? As much as I'd not recommend doing that too often, if you are going to do it, try and do something not bad, but do something not as fun beforehand, right? Maybe jump in the cold shower, maybe do a really hard workout session at the gym. Make sure you've done it before you go out, and then have a cold shower as well or something, and just make sure you've done something to like earn it, right? A delayed gratification is all about earning stuff, right? Earning the fun things in life. Just make sure whatever you do, you've earned it. And yeah, that's all 3 steps, guys. And that is a bit of an overview, kind of science of dopamine. Bit of a longer video, this one, but it is important. Dopamine detox is a huge part of self-improvement. And yeah, hope you guys found this video helpful. And let me know if you end up implementing any of these steps. Please comment down below if you found it helpful at all. And yeah, I'll see you in the next one. See ya.